Good morning to viewers in Stockholm or Europe, and good afternoon or good evening to our audience in Taiwan or anywhere else in the world. Welcome to ISDP Taiwan Lecture Series. My name is Jingbo Jun. I'm a research fellow at the Asia Program and Stockholm China Center here at ISDP. Thank you all for joining us today. We are very delighted to host this timely panel discussion on Taiwan's 9-in-1 local elections, which just took place last Saturday. And I am very honored to be joined by two distinguished experts on the subject, Dr. Zsuzsa Anna Ferenczi and Mr. Thompson Chow. One is in Taipei, like myself, and one is in Bangkok right now. And let me first introduce our guest in Taipei. Dr. Zsuzsa Anna Ferenczi is an associated research fellow at ISDP and affiliated scholar at the Department of Political Science of the Free University of Brussels, or commonly known as VUB. She's also the head of the associate network at 9-Line, a fast-growing platform dedicated to offering original comments and analysis on issues affecting the Indo-Pacific area. She also serves as a research fellow at Taiwan NextGen Foundation, expert consultant on China, Taiwan, and the Korean Peninsula of Human Rights Without Frontiers. She currently conducts research as a Taiwan Fellow hosted by the Ministry of Science and Technology of Taiwan and is an assistant professor at the National Donghua University in Hualien, Taiwan. Zsuzsa's research area includes EU foreign policy and security policy, European normative power and human rights, EU relations with China and Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific. Welcome, Zsuzsa. And now let's turn to our expert in Bangkok, currently in Bangkok, Thailand. Thompson Chow is a journalist covering news in Taiwan and Myanmar, primarily for Nikkei Asia and The Economist, respectively. He's also a media executive at award-winning Burmese news outlet Frontier Myanmar. He was a co-recipient of the 2021 Vivian Wu Journalism Award and has written articles for the Financial Times, Foreign Policy, The Guardian, The Telegraph, and other publications. Outside journalism, Thompson served as a director of the Myanmar Hong Kong Chamber of Commerce and Industry until recently. He holds an MA degree from Scotland's University of St. Andrews. Welcome, Thompson. In terms of the logistics for this webinar, we will break into four parts. First, I will have a brief presentation about the results of the elections. And second, Thompson will share his observation while covering the 9-in-1 local elections for Nikkei Asia over the past few weeks. Then we will turn to Zsuzsa for her views on the elections as well. In the Q&A session, as a panelist/moderator, I will raise some follow-up questions. And finally, the floor will be open to the audience. We welcome questions at any point. Please just use the Q&A chat function to post your questions and affiliations. All right, so let's get started, and I will begin my presentation. Okay. Share the screen and okay, can everybody see the slides? Okay, perfect. So, okay, I'm sure that some of our audience members have already known the results of the elections, but I will give a quick recap so every viewer can have a better understanding or context of what has happened in this year's Taiwan's local elections. Okay, so last Saturday, Taiwanese voters headed to the polls to elect about 11,000 public officials in 9 different categories of positions, ranging from mayors and magistrates, county and city councilors to chiefs of townships and villages. Much of the focus has been put on the 22 mayoral and the magisterial seats, including mayors of the 6 special municipalities and mayors and magistrates of the 16 counties and cities. But last weekend, Jiayi City Mayor election was postponed to December 18 due to a death of a candidate only a few weeks ago. That was unfortunate. So right now there were during the election there were 6 plus 15 in total 21 mayoral and magisterial seats were elected over the weekend. Besides, there was a referendum on whether to approve a constitutional amendment to lower both the voting age and the minimum age of candidacy to 18. And since Thompson has covered this news when he was in Taiwan, so I'll leave this part to him, let him explain the story of it and also the result of it. As mentioned, the key battleground races were 22 seats of mayors and magistrates, and Taiwan's ruling party, Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, suffered an unprecedented defeat, winning just 5 seats of the 21 seats contested last weekend. The opposition, KMT, scored 13 seats, and while Taiwan People's Party, TPP, is not a Trans-Pacific Partnership, is the Taiwan People's Party, won 1 seat in Hsinchu, which is right over here, and independent candidates won 2 seats, one in Miaoli County and one in Jinmen or Kinmen County, right here. But this is not geographically is not here. It just for the convenience of the map. Is right here, but it's actually here, very close to Xiamen in mainland China. Compared to last local elections in 2018, we can see that DPP not only failed to win the island's capital, Taipei, right here, but also lost control of the majorities in other 3 key battleground cities, which is Taoyuan and Hsinchu, we just pointed that out earlier, and Keelung is right over here, leaving the party with no control of any city or county in the whole northern Taiwan. So you can see it's all pretty much blue, controlled by pan-blue candidates. As for the KMT, although the total number of seats was reduced from 15 to 13, as you can see here, the 2 independent magistrate-elect in Miaoli and Jinmen have pan-blue background. Also, the KMT is very likely to win Jiayi election, a city mayor election next month. So KMT leaders are quite happy with the results. Regarding the TPP, they won an important seat for itself in Hsinchu, also known as Taiwan Silicon Valley, as it hosts the TSMC and other semiconductor company headquarters. According to the Central Election Commission in Taiwan, voter turnout rates for the mayoral and magisterial elections were relatively low, with 59.86% in the 6 special municipalities, which is the highest level of local governments in Taiwan, and 64.2% in the other 15 counties and cities. Both figures are much lower than the elections 4 years ago, as you can see right here. Well, despite the low turnout, several KMT candidates won their races handily by large margins against their DPP opponents. Take the 6 special municipalities, for example. First, in Taipei, the KMT candidate Jiang Wan'an won by more than 10% against the DPP's Chen Shizhong in this competitive 3-way race. The independent candidate Huang Shanshan, who is backed by the incumbent Taipei City Mayor Ko Wen-je, garnered about 25% of the votes, which is more than many people had expected. And as we know, Chen Shizhong was a minister of health and welfare for the most time during the pandemic. This result kind of reflect that Taipei voters are not happy with the way that his team handled the fight against the COVID, especially the slow rollout of vaccines. We can talk about this in the Q&A section. Then in New Taipei City, we see that incumbent Hou You-yi performed extremely strong against his DPP challenger Lin Jialong, winning 62.4% of the vote against Lin's 37.6% of the vote. In Taoyuan, which is probably the most important battleground race for blue and green, KMT's candidate Zhang Shanzhen also won by around 12% of the vote against the DPP's Zheng Yunpeng. And I think it is worth pointing out that former Hsinchu Mayor Lin Zhijian, who was the key, he is the key factor in DPP's defeat in Taoyuan. Lin was the original candidate for the DPP, not Zheng Yunpeng. But Lin Zhijian decided to withdraw from the mayoral election in Taoyuan after the National Taiwan University confirmed the accusation of the plagiarism about his master thesis and revoked his master's degree in early August. Despite the withdrawal, the damage has been done, especially when President Tsai was first asking the whole DPP party to trust him. So you can see the result kind of reflect that the impact of the plagiarism scandal. In Taichung, KMT's incumbent mayor Lu Shouyan secured a landslide victory by a large margin of about 20% of the vote against DPP's Cai Qi-chang. Even in Tainan, a traditional DPP stronghold, the KMT contender Xie Longjie lost to the incumbent DPP mayor Huang Weizhe by an insignificant margin of about 5.2%, which was quite surprising to many observers. Okay, the only special municipality that the DPP performed well was in Kaohsiung, in which its incumbent mayor Chen Qimai won by a margin of nearly 18% against KMT's Ke Zhiren. Due largely to this victory, the DPP announced that Chen Qimai now serves as the acting chairperson for the DPP after President Tsai accepted defeat and decided to step aside as chairperson of the party. So if we look at the evolution of political landscape over the past 4 major elections, President Tsai of the DPP won big in the presidential election in 2016 and 2020. You can see the map is very green. But in both local elections, KMT had 2 landslide victories in 2018 and this recent elections in this year, 2022. Would the next presidential election follow or break this routine? Let's have a look at the potential candidates for the 2024 presidential elections. The most likely DPP presidential candidate for 2024 is William Lai, right here, who challenged Tsai Ing-wen in the last presidential primary and has served as vice president under Tsai's second term in office. Incumbent Taoyuan Mayor Zheng Wen-chan Zheng Wen-can and former Vice President Chen Jianren might still throw their hats into the ring. However, the big losses for the DPP in Taoyuan and Taipei, as I have shown earlier in the previous slides, these two defeats have undermined their chances. Not least because Zheng Wen-can couldn't pass his legacy to Zheng Yunpeng, the DPP's candidate in Taoyuan, and Chen Jianren couldn't help Chen Shizhong, the former health minister in Taiwan, to win Taipei, the capital. As for the KMT, we will see the party chair, Eric Chu, right here, Zhu Lilun. We'll see if he will join the race again, or letting Hou Youyi or Lu Xiuyan, the two mayors with very strong mandate of the two cities, as shown in the previous slides, to be the candidate for the KMT. Last but not least, it will be important to see if the current incumbent Taipei City Mayor Ko Wen-je of the TPP is founded by him, the Taiwan's People's Party, founded by Ko Wen-je. We'll see that if he will actually announce his bid for 2024, and if Terry Guo Taiming, Foxconn, will do the same too, because there's a lot of people maybe expecting him to run again. He was one of the candidates in the KMT's primary during the last presidential elections. In any case, this year's elections went quite smoothly, and that no major incidents happened right before and during the voting day, which is good news, very good news for Taiwan's democracy. So thank you for your interest in Taiwan's issue, Taiwan's vibrant democracy. I will pass right now I'll end my presentation. I will pass the floor to Thompson, who cover Taiwan's local election for Nikkei Asia during this time. Thank you very much. Let me end this sharing.
Thank you very much, Bo-jun. So I think it's my time now to share. And first of all, greetings from Bangkok, and thanks a lot to Bo-jun and ISDP for this invitation. I'll now share my screen and start my presentation. Right, can you guys see the screen clearly? Is it clear? So I think just now, Bo-jun's presentation already, he clearly explained some of the details and the results of the elections and the context for different political parties and politicians. I think today, for my presentation, I'll focus a review of some of the key findings of the results, building on what Bo-jun has already said, and I look into the implications of how these results affect the relations with China, the 2024 presidential race, and also how it will shake up different political parties. I think I'll focus a bit more on the ruling party, the Democratic Progressive Party, and the key opposition, the Kuomintang, the KMT, and perhaps also some notes on the third party, so Mayor Ke's Taiwan People's Party, who took Hsinchu City. And of course, I would end my presentation by touching upon the referendum to lower the voting age, which failed this time. So the referendum did not pass, and Taiwan will not be changing its voting age anytime soon. And I think when we look at the results, some context is important. Historically, the KMT has almost always done a lot better in the local elections than the DPP. So this chart from Nikkei, based on the Taiwan Central Election Commission analysis, shows the performance of the last two elections. I think the 2014, I must say the 2014 one is more of an exception for the DPP, because as you see, the DPP has done a lot better in 2014. But as I think, as far as I'm aware, in this century, the DPP has never really numerically won the local elections apart from 2014. And that's primarily because of the president, Ma Ying-jeou. At that time, the KMT president's proposed free trade agreement with China, and that triggered a widespread public backlash. And so sort of that election was a response to that backlash. And then 4 years later, we see, as Bojun mentioned before, there was another movement, nationwide movement, but in the opposite direction. And this time, the KMT's Kaohsiung candidate, Han Kuo-yu, scored an upset victory in the southern city in Taiwan. We all know that a bit more than a year later, he tried to run for the presidency, but lost, was soundly defeated by Tsai Ing-wen. So I think it's important to note that the KMT has historically almost always done pretty well in local elections. And this time it seems it is no different for them, for the KMT, and also for the DPP. And of course, I think you guys might have seen this chart earlier already. We can see basically the ruling party was swept out of power across northern Taiwan. And I think numerically, you see that KMT really has won a very big majority in terms of the counties and mayorships across Taiwan. I think one thing to note here is what was mentioned by Bojun earlier. In the northern Taiwan, we can see the cities in Taoyuan and Hsinchu and Taipei. It was part of the result of this DPP defeat was that part of the factor was because of the plagiarism scandal of the former Hsinchu mayor who went to try to run in Taoyuan and who got embroiled in a big scandal about his thesis and has his degree revoked by the university. So I think that particular incident really affected those numerous races there. And I think this narrative was very much being supported by even some of the ruling party politicians who were saying that, this particular plagiarism scandal did affect those candidates running for those cities. But I think a bit more context here, apart from the city mayors and county governors and magistrates, is the number of seats, like local councillors across Taiwan. And yes, we can see in 2022, that's the bottom of the chart here. The DPP actually has won more local council seats than 2018. The KMT has lost a few, but again, I think the local council seats present a slightly different picture than the provincial and sort of county and mayor results. And then we have the referendum to lower the voting age from 20 to 18. Most in Asia, including East Asia and Southeast Asia, the voting age is 18. So Taiwan in this case is more of an anomaly. And I think this time the referendum was supported by across parties in the Taiwanese parliament. But I think many of the supporters of the referendum pointed out that Taiwan has one of the highest thresholds in changing the constitution across the world. So you need it's really quite difficult to get the whole amendment approved across parliament, the legislative process, and in the referendum. So this time, the number of votes needed, the number of yes votes needed would be half of the total number of eligible voters in Taiwan. So that would be around more than 9.6 million. And as we can see here, the yes votes end up to be only 5.6 million. So that's a 4 million difference. That's a huge difference. And I think the number of no votes also surprised some of the observers and many of the referendum supporters. We have more than 5 million people saying no in the referendum to lower Taiwan's voting age. So what are the implications? I think a lot of outside observers and foreign media will be looking at relations with China, how these elections change the relations with China, change the party politics in Taiwan. I think here I'm putting two quotes today. I think one is from Michael Riley, the former British representative to Taiwan, he told Nikkei Asia that it would be foolish to try and make any predictions as to the next presidential election on the basis of the local election result. And I think primarily that's because local elections are fundamentally very different from the national races, whether it is the national legislative election or the presidential election, both scheduled in January 2024. Some observers may try to link the results with, oh, maybe Taiwan has changed their heart on China. Maybe they want to be closer to China. That's why they're supporting the KMT, which is a lot more associated with China. But I think many analysts and experts in Taiwan would also strongly dispute this narrative. I think China has moved quickly to create, to sort of jump on this more favorable narrative for them. The Chinese government has briefly responded to the local election results already. But I think most people in Taiwan would not agree to that. The vote is not about China. It's primarily a vote about local issues. So I think another senior diplomat in Taipei also told me before the election that, I mean, if you take a step back, the KMT having lost the presidency twice already, and also lost their majority in parliament last time, and they also lost the referendums. So they have pretty much, they are being battered in recent years over, on the national political stage. So this time, winning big for them in this local election is sort of prerequisite for them to regain political momentum and to get ready for the presidential race. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are well positioned to win that race, but at least now I think they have gathered some momentum. So I think for implications for the ruling party, the DPP, we have seen that Tsai Ing-wen has already resigned as the party leader, as she had done in the last local election after the heavy defeat. I think many people would be interested to look at who would succeed her as next chairman. One of the sources close to the ruling party told me the Mayor Chen Qimai probably would take up the acting chair for now until a new chairman, a new leader is chosen. And people are now watching whether Tsai Ing-wen's VP, William Lai, would throw his hat in the ring. I think Bojan also mentioned there are other candidates potentially eyeing the 2024 presidency and sort of running on the DPP ticket, including the former vice president and also other mayors around. But I think, again, as Bojan pointed out, because they are a lot more associated with this local election, the campaigns and the failures, their position within the party has been undermined. And so what's next for the KMT? As I said, there's momentum for them for 2024. I think now a lot of people are looking at who's the front runner or who are the front runners for 2024. So I think here we have a nicely photo summing up some of the big faces, some of the smiley faces in the party. I think you have seen the 43-year-old Chang Wan-an, who is snatched Taipei, which is, I must say, Taipei has usually been a stronghold for the KMT, but they lost the city twice in the last 6 years to the TPP. So this time he took it back. But I think a lot of analysts I've spoken to, no one's thinking he's serious about 2024. He just won the race. He's still very young. He's still not senior enough within the party hierarchy. So he would need time to build his credentials and influence and political experience. But I think left of Chang Wan-an is the new Taipei mayor, Hou You-yi. So he's seen as one of the two key front runners here. The one beside him is Eric Chu, also a front runner. He's the party leader, the party chairman. So I think analysts in Taiwan are looking at how these two play out, how the rivalries and competition play out, and who would get anointed to be the KMT candidate in 2024. I think one of the professors in Taiwan, Professor Pan Chao-min, he told me that Eric Chu, as party leader, he takes some credits for this local election victory. But in terms of popularity, he's way behind. Hou You-yi is so much more popular, and Hou You-yi would be well placed to throw his hat in the ring. Professor Pan, however, also pointed out that a key weakness for Hou is his ability to manage China-Taiwan relations, the so-called cross-strait relations. And Pan said that if he wants to prove himself to be, taking on the presidency, he would need to show how he would deal with China, how he would work things out at a time when the tension across the strait is a lot more worse than before. And I think last but not least, I will briefly comment and analyze what's next for Taiwan's third party, the so-called third party in Taiwan, the Taiwan People's Party. Ko-Wen-je, his deputy, Huang Shanshan, lost the Taipei mayoral race. There are some rumors that she might consider running for a legislative seat for the constituency now being vacant because Chang Wan-an, the KMT mayor who won, he had to quit. He quit his lawmaker seat, so maybe she would run. But anyway, I think the key point for the TPP is that they won the Hsinchu city mayorship by N Kao, a TPP lawmaker backed by Terry Guo. So basically, they retained one municipal apparatus to sustain the party's influence and publicity, and that would be very important for Ko-Wen-je when he, survives for the next year or so, and to prepare for the presidential run. I think most analysts I've spoken to would say that, now they have won at least one city. Ke most likely will run on his own presidential ticket, and that's also because if he runs on his own, then he could run the whole campaign on his own, and also that benefits and drives the campaigns of candidates, TPP candidates who are running for the Taiwan legislative election, and that's quite important to drum up nationwide publicity and the momentum. So I think I'll end here and pass it back to Bo-Jun, and looking forward to questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thompson, for your recap and for your presentation. You really added another solid layer of the analysis of the results, and bringing a lot of insights on the ground. We all know that you have to cover these local elections in Taiwan and in many different cities. Maybe we can hear about your sharing of some stories, because I know you went to Mazu and Hualien, right? And also I think Dr. Susha goes to Hualien on a frequent basis. So yeah, thanks again. And also Thompson has produced a series of in-depth articles for Nikkei Asia. So for our viewers, if you're interested in reading stories produced by Thompson, highly recommend it. And maybe we can post some links, or Thompson, you can post some links in the group chat to the audience. Thank you. Now let's turn to Dr. Susha, and yeah, the floor is yours, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Bo-Jun. Thank you for having me, and good to be on the same panel with Thompson and with you. And I'm glad we're organizing this, even though already it's been almost, a week now, and so much has happened in between. And I think that's not surprising, because I think just we live in a world that is really dominated by a lot of events at the same time. So I'll try to bring an additional layer to the conversation, and I'll share my screen, which will be a lot less colorful than the presentations we saw, because you both talked about the blue and the green and all of that. So I'm not going to repeat any of that. I will highlight, parts where I agree, mostly that's the case. And as I said, I will try to bring in an additional layer, as I am obviously a foreigner living in Taiwan right now. I have European views on this, but also probably in line with international views to a great extent when it comes to democracy and such issues. So let me just share my screen and start my presentation. Can you see my slides? Okay, maybe I should, yeah, here. trying to have full screen. Okay, so, oops, here. I would like to, this is the outline for the next 10-15 minutes that I have. I would like to look at the internal and external implications of these elections, the local elections, and move on from the external implications to discussing a little bit Taiwan in the world. And I think this is of value, given that in spite of the fact that these are local elections, Taiwan is very much an international issue, and it's becoming one increasingly. So I think it's very relevant to look at these elections from a broader perspective and discuss questions of perception of Taiwan and also Taiwan's own self-perception, because I think this is very relevant, again, when it comes to elections. And I will do that from a European perspective, and I will look at some of the challenges that I think we will face going forward. So as this was said by Thompson, also that these were local elections about local issues and not particularly about cross-strait relations. The KMT has maintained a strong local roots, and also, as this was, I think, highlighted by a lot of experts, which I also agree with myself, that the DPP has not been able to break through these stronghold in the majority of the different parts in Taiwan. But while the results are not a rejection of the government's China policy or the approach concerning cross-strait relations, I think the relevance of Taiwan's cross-strait policy will remain ahead of the presidential elections in 2024. So I thought about, I thought that if I articulate some questions that I have come across discussing local elections with expats living in Taiwan or other experts outside of Taiwan, what are the questions that come up most often when we talk about the local elections? And so the question is, how or did at all the local elections impact Taiwan's international image? That's, I think, in my view, one of the questions that is relevant to look at. And also the second question, and it's something I think I've been doing some research on recently, is that how can Taiwan capitalize on its democratic resilience, which actually we did see through these elections, and build on this resilience in order to strengthen economic resilience. And I will elaborate that in the second part. And then finally, I will also look at the question, of course, of the Taiwan's cross-strait policy looking forward. And this is, again, in spite of the fact that these are local elections, a very relevant question. So concerning the first question, how did the local elections impact Taiwan's international image? Well, I think this is something that we can all agree on, that there has been a momentum for Taiwan internationally. There has been an unprecedented level of international attention paid to Taiwan and also international support. This is clearly the case of the European Union and member states of the European Union. And I think here, if we use the elements that have really been at the core of the Taiwan's image, I would highlight transparency, and I would even use what Taiwan's digital minister Audrey Tang said, that Taiwan's radical transparency has been an element that was very helpful in dealing with the pandemic, clearly, but also in dealing with threats coming from China, threats that have been increasing in the past years. And I think this momentum is also the reason why we are talking about the local elections in an international context, because Taiwan is no longer a local issue, I would say here. It is Taiwan's issues, Taiwan's threats coming from the People's Republic of China are increasingly spoken about, and the awareness in Europe of the situation is at a much higher level. So in this momentum, of course, the other side of the coin, I would say, is that at the same time as the momentum has been increasing concerning Taiwan, there has been a growing skepticism regarding China among democratic like-minded partners. Most recently, this was amplified by Xi Jinping's diplomatic support to Putin in his invasion of Ukraine. So this has added on to the skepticism, anxiety felt about China and China's influence and its behavior in the region, but also globally. China's mismanagement of COVID, lack of transparency in this process, at the use of disinformation at the expense of democracy again, and to boost authoritarian advance, its military buildup in the South China Sea, overall, the assertiveness coming out of China, the record in human rights that has been deplorable, and the situation in Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, all these issues. I mean, the list is long, but all of this has clearly amplified the concerns. And I would say that in this context, I think in the European Union, we started to have an understanding that we see Taiwan as, in a way, the opposite of the People's Republic of China when it comes to transparency, trust, reliability. And we see Taiwan on its own merit as a like-minded democracy, as a partner. So that allows me to move on to build on this democracy element in my presentation, because I think it's interesting to look at what the perception is in Europe and Taiwan's place in this political discourse, because for the first time, Taiwan is on the EU's agenda in its own right, but also seen in the context of the Indo-Pacific. And that's also relevant because the whole dynamic concerning the Indo-Pacific is a response to the change in the balance of power in the Asia-Pacific region, which is to a great extent led as a response to China's growing assertiveness. So there's three dimensions, I think, in the perception that we have of Taiwan, and what is relevant when we perceive Taiwan in the context of our relationship also with China. Is the first is a democracy dimension, a like-minded democracy. This is the language that we use officially in our EU statements, communications. And as a normative power, the EU is expected to stand up for Taiwan. The second dimension would be trade, because I think this is also something that not a lot of people know, not just in Taiwan, but I would say in Europe itself, that the EU is the largest investor in Taiwan. And the advanced semiconductors that Taiwan makes are critical to the EU's economy. And finally, there is the security dimension, which has increased in the context of the Indo-Pacific, where the language now is that we agree in the European Union that the display of force in the Taiwan Strait may have a direct impact on European security and prosperity, and that we are aware of an increase in military hybrid threat and cyber threats. So in this context, and I think this is a useful map, and I guess the only color I have in my presentation today, which happens to be blue, but out of context blue here. This looks at the stock of Taiwan's outbound FDI by 2020. So if we look at the left-hand side, we see that 55% of Taiwan's FDI goes to China, whereas the inbound FDI from the outside world into Taiwan, yes, 25.7% of that comes from the European Union. And so that means that is what I was saying earlier, that Taiwan is the largest investor in Taiwan. So we clearly have interest to protect here in the region. So speaking of democracy and FDI and investment and linking democratic resilience and economic resilience, I would say that this is moving on to the second question, whether Taiwan can capitalize on democratic resilience, because I think, as it was said earlier in the two previous presentations, everything went pretty much smoothly and with transparency in these local elections, which were part of Taiwan's democratization process, and it's part of a process of building up democratic resilience. But then there is the question of economic resilience. And with this 55% of Taiwan's outbound FDI going to China, I think it's a very valid and relevant question, because while internally as part of this process, every election cycle conducted in transparency does contribute to consolidating Taiwan's democratic resilience. Externally, democracy is seen as Taiwan's greatest asset or greatest strength along the tech expertise. But I think there's a clear understanding that Taiwan is vulnerable to the lack of its economic resilience. And that brings me to the China factor in this context and to the cross-strait policies, because I think it's more accurate to speak of policies and policies as opposed to policy, because we are seeing differences in the way the KMT looks at the future of the relationship with China and how the DPP has been dealing with the China question in the past years. So that allows me to go and jump to my third question, or the third question that I presented here, that what about Taiwan's cross-strait policies? So I think there's also an agreement among observers of these elections that DPP was unsuccessful to frame these elections as an opportunity to show defiance towards China. And I think it will be interesting to look at how the people inside Taiwan perceive DPP's and also the KMT's future policies when it comes to dealing with China. I think this is going to be a relevant question going forward from these elections. And I would not like to repeat what Thompson said, because I think that's why I'm sticking to the broader picture, because he already touched upon this question to some extent. So in terms of the future and what kind of soul searching we can expect from both the DPP and the KMT, I think remains an open question to see how they each side of both the major parties can tackle the question of what kind of future they want to build or maintain, not to build, rather to maintain with China in the current context, and also what do actually their own voters want to see going forward. And I actually did look at some polls that were conducted recently on the feelings of the people in Taiwan. And I think this is from October, a survey that I'm looking at that was conducted in October this year, so before the elections, obviously, by the Mainland Affairs Council, that looked at the question whether, do you think that the mainland Chinese government's attitude toward the government of the ROC, Taiwan, is friendly or unfriendly? And 78% of the respondents responded that they believe that it is an unfriendly approach from Beijing towards Taipei government. And the second question, I think it's also 60% of the respondents believe that the mainland Chinese government's attitude toward the people of Taiwan is unfriendly. And I mean, these are pretty high numbers. And I think it's also interesting to look at the numbers that came out actually after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, concerning to what extent people of Taiwan are ready to fight should there be an invasion from China in the future. And there was a percentage of 60% of those speaking that they would be ready. But then at the same time, as I'm based in Taiwan and I ask these questions often among my students as I teach in Hualien, I get a very mixed picture. So I think it would be interesting if we could also discuss that in a later, to what extent really there is a readiness in light of the invasion of Ukraine, because I think these questions will be very relevant for both DPP and KMT to address and to get a good sense of where the people want to go in terms of the future of the status quo. And I think this will be very relevant. So this brings me to my last slide. I try to look at the internal dimensions a little bit, but mostly at the external dimensions. And to conclude, I would say that there is this momentum that there's an unprecedented level of international support that really was built up under President Tsai Ing-wen's leadership, which benefited from the democratic strength of society in Taiwan. And this was also closely linked, again, looking in from the outside, this was linked to seeing Taiwan deal with the pandemic in such a successful and efficient way. But this is the perception from the outside, because as Thompson said before, internally, there was not such a high level of support for the way the government dealt with the pandemic at different stages, in particular when it comes to the vaccines. So I think that's very interesting, and there's perhaps a disconnect between how the world sees Taiwan, how the people of Taiwan see themselves and their role in the world. But nevertheless, I think there is an agreement that Taiwan can play and is ready to play a more important role internationally. And also to conclude, there is at the same time this unprecedented level of coercion and intimidation from the PRC that both parties will need to address going forward, and also to look at that question of status quo and stability. And finally, really to capitalize on this international momentum, I think will be equally important for both parties, and to communicate that internally. I think communication will be very important, as it was important in local elections, because locally voters relate most closely to the people closest to them. That's why they were so localized, these elections. But going forward at the higher level or presidential elections, I think the communication will be very important, and also the diversification. I mean, it's a question that we have as in the international community, Europeans, concerning that economic resilience when it comes to Taiwan's future. So again, I think that's these are open questions in a way. So I hope, I mean, I'd rather not bring really answers to these questions, but put them out here for us to discuss. So I think with that, I really went over my time. So I would like to stop here and perhaps just move on to questions, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suja. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, particularly linking the local elections, which is pretty much in the domain of domestic politics, to the perception of Taiwan on the EU, if not global stages. So, and I also you highlighted the nexus between Taiwan's elections with the three dimensions: democracy, trade, and security, and you know, pointing out the big questions about not just about democratic resilience as shown in these elections, but also the question about economic resilience, which it's a very important. And finally, you talk about soul searching. I think it's a extremely important question, because in 14 months we're gonna have the presidential elections in Taiwan, and as you mentioned, how do the ruling DPP or the opposition KMT or even the TPP of Ko-Aung, the third party, how do they prepare for the presidential elections to answer the question about the future of status quo and like defense, Taiwanese willingness to protect Taiwan in unfortunate scenarios of China's invasion, or maybe, and I think I'll raise this question to you later about the concept of the 1992 consensus, one China policy, this kind of thing.